Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Sarah Fensky. The rapper Nelly is being sued by his former bandmates. They claim he failed to credit them on the hit album he released 24 years ago. But how can they possibly pursue a legal claim on a matter that old? And Mission Taco Joint is changing its name to Session Taco after a lawsuit from the maker of Mission-branded tortillas. What went wrong on this case for this St. Louis restaurant group? And the HBO show Chimp Crazy showed a St. Louis nurse admitting on camera she'd flat out lied to a federal judge. Should she face repercussions for her actions? Joining us today to help us make sense of these matters and many more is our Legal Roundtable. And today, that includes Nicole Gorovsky. She's a former prosecutor in both state and federal court, and today she practices at Jenkins and Kling PC. Nicole, welcome.
Hi there.
And we're also joined today by Bevis Schock. He practices in Clayton at Schock Law. Bevis, welcome back.
Thank you, Sarah.
And last but never least, Javad Khazaeli is here with us today. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's also an attorney and founding member with the St. Louis firm Khazaeli Wersch. Javad, welcome back.
Great to be back.
So we have so many fascinating tabloid tales on the roster today. I'm just in heaven. But before we dig into HBO and Nelly, I want to talk about two high-profile cases that are a lot more serious. These are both cases that ended in death. Now, the first one is a criminal case out of St. Charles County. This involves the Honduran national who killed a St. Louis police officer while this Honduran national was driving drunk on Sunday. Ramon Chavez Rodriguez had previously pleaded guilty to assault charges. This was a really ugly case. He was charged in St. Charles County in 2020 after an assault on a woman he lived with. He allegedly strangled, punched, and kicked her, then accelerated the car toward her on the street. He pleaded guilty to second-degree assault. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation and parole. And the DWI charges, including one for driving drunk with a minor in the vehicle, those were then dropped. That deal was accepted by then St. Charles County prosecutor Tim Lomar. And now this guy ends up being free to be out there driving to kill a police officer just trying to do his job. Javad, did Tim Lomar let this guy off too lightly?
That's a hard question. What I can tell you, I asked around amongst the legal community and some of my friends, and I think Prosecutor Lomar was in a tough position. From what I've been told, the victim in that crime refused to testify. And eventually they had to take a plea bargain, taking that into account. But I think there's some other points that we should talk about here. Number one, I know that. Most people in the public don't know that. So there's a question as to why Prosecutor Lomar has gotten kind of a free pass on this when we had a similar type case of a person out on bond in St. Louis City in that terrible accident with the teenager who was visiting downtown St. Louis for a volleyball tournament, and she was hit by somebody who was out on bond, multiple violations, and had both of her legs amputated. And in that case, the major story on that was being pushed was, why did Kim Gardner allow him out? And instead of focusing on that, and why did Prosecutor Lomar allow this person out, what we're now focusing on is this person's immigration status.
Sure. And that is a fair question in this case.
Yeah. So I used to be a prosecutor at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I did deportation cases, mostly in the national security context. But I've been to immigration courts all across the country. And what I think the through thread on this is the criticisms on these cases are people who don't really care about the outcome. I mean, from everything I've heard, and I've sued the St. Louis Police Department more than anybody, but Officer David Lee was a great officer, universally loved. His name never showed up on my desk. But I think what we're looking at here is that the people who are pushing these stories are only doing it for political means. Mm-hmm. That this is becoming a story because Josh Hawley can go out and say, close the border, when the statistics on this are pretty clear. Undocumented immigrants, there are many of them in this country, and some of them commit crimes. But the statistics are clear. They commit crimes at a rate 1/3 the rate that U.S. citizens commit crimes.
Nicole?
Yeah, I think this case is a great service announcement. It's got so many layers here because, first of all, I came in here ready to just slam on Tim Lomar. The guy not only got 5 years probation, but he got a suspended imposition of sentence, which means if he completes the 5 years probation, a lot of people don't know what that means. It means the conviction goes away and won't be on his record. So, but then it's a great learning lesson to understand that we don't always know the full story.
And you were a prosecutor. If a victim doesn't cooperate in a case like this, that does affect what you're able to do.
It sure does, because obviously everyone knows that the defendant has the right to confront the witnesses against him, and so it makes a huge difference. It's also a great lesson because, just as Javad said, people didn't know that. I didn't know that. And so it does look like it brings up a race issue of Kim Gardner versus Tim Lomar. And why is Tim Lomar getting a pass on these issues and Kim Gardner was not? So I think this case, like I said, has so many layers to it that are interesting lessons for our community.
Part of what I find myself wondering about is this immigration issue. Why was this man who was found guilty, he took this plea, he was not deported? Is it because of that suspended imposition of sentence? Javad, how does that work?
It's not the suspended imposition of sentence. It's about the underlying charge. Had he been convicted of the felony, there are certain crimes called aggravated felonies within the Immigration and Nationality Act that are laid out that do not allow an immigration judge to bond somebody out. Had he been convicted of the underlying original charge, he would still be locked up. Now, one thing I can tell you is that it's pretty clear this guy's never seeing the streets of America ever again. Yeah. Even if I think it's going to be difficult for him to beat this charge based on the info out there. But even if he does, based on this, he's going to be detained. He's going to be removed from this country. The question now becomes, is he going to serve time in Missouri prisons before he's removed? But he's never seeing the streets of America again.
It's just too bad it happened too late to help this officer, David Lee. Bevis Schock?
It's not a legal issue. It's a political issue, I would say, is why would anybody who pled guilty to crime like that not, as a matter of United States law, be removed from the country? I just don't understand. We got a lot of people here who aren't supposed to be here. I think we got to let them work. There's no choice but to let them work, get them on the payroll. But if a guy is in here and he's not documented and he's committed a serious crime of violence, which don't forget, he wasn't convicted, but he pled.
Right. He pled to assault.
He pled to a violent crime. That guy ought to be gone. That should be a matter of American law.
Javad, is that something that has changed recently? I mean, you were doing this years ago. Was it typically the case that a guy like this would get to stay after a crime like the one that he pled to, not the one he was originally charged with?
So let's be clear. The question is, would he get to stay is a different question as to whether he was released from custody while his case was proceeding. He had an immigration case scheduled, from what I read, for next week. Based on some of the facts that are out there, I think it's very likely that this person would have been eventually deported from the country. The question is, while he's getting his due process, arguing his case, we don't know the underlying relief that he applied for. Did he have an asylum claim? Was he somebody that was politically persecuted? We don't know anything. Just like Nicole said, it's hard to tell. Now, he eventually, very likely, based on these crimes, would have been deported. The question is, would he have been bonded out at that point? And under immigration law, that would have been an option for the judge.
And that's to say you're not being held in custody. You're allowed to be out there living while you wait.
While you go through your case. And I can tell you this. I don't know the underlying facts of this case. The 3 immigration judges in Kansas City aren't liberal judges. They're not people, they have, I think, on average, an 85 to 90% denial rate. This isn't some place where people are let willy-nilly out. So I don't know the underlying facts. I don't even know if Immigration and Customs Enforcement would have known what the final breakdown is. But what he pled to was a misdemeanor from what I read. And a misdemeanor is treated very differently under the immigration laws compared to a felony.
We also have an issue of how much room there is in the jails. Apparently last week there was no water in the St. Louis County Jail for 2 days. And it's an extraordinary thing. My phone's been lit up, but it's over now. So we're a wealthy county. We've got a brand new justice center. There's no water. Now let's add another 20,000 people in jail. There's no place to put them. There aren't any guards. We tore down the workhouse. I mean, there's no place to put these
We haven't
people.
torn down the workhouse yet.
Torn it down.
But
Yeah,
yes, we are attempting to do that.
That's ahead.
So this will get me on my immigration reform soapbox. Okay, right now there's a backlog of 40,000 cases in the Kansas City Immigration Court.
Wow.
One of the things that immigration reform allows you to do is take the people who have been in this country, who have been working, who have not been violating laws, and allow them a path to adjust and stay here, and then focus on criminals like this. But the idea that 3 judges are going to be able to pick 1 out of 40,000 people and deal with that, it's absurd. It's absurd. So if we're going to, this goes back to the immigration reform bill that President Biden tried to pass that Donald Trump told the Republicans to kill. That would have brought hundreds of new immigration judges forward. But you can't expect these 3 judges, literally 3, to do 40,000 cases and then second guess them on this type of stuff. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to clear the system out of people who are good people, let them move on. And we absolutely need to do what I used to do at ICE. Focus on the bad guys and get rid of them, as opposed to letting them get lost in the pile.
Now, as you're listening out here to our 3 expert panelists, you may have questions about how all this is sorted out. We're not going to get into a debate about immigration reform. However, we've got somebody here who really understands how the system works and doesn't work, and 2 other very smart attorneys here as well. You can join the conversation with your question at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air. Bevis, any thoughts responding to what Javad just said?
I agree with every word he said. There's no way to for the system to handle these people, and you said you don't want to get into a political discussion about immigration, so I can't say anything else.
I am going to put on my website that Bevis Schock agreed with me on my immigration stance.
This is what we try to do at the Legal Roundtable. We bring right and left together and talk about the law.
For all of you out there who couldn't see into our room, Javad had his arms high in the air in celebration.
Well, let's talk about another high-profile case. This one came to an abrupt end last night. The state of Missouri executed Marcellus Williams. St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell had attempted to overturn this conviction, and Marcellus Williams' attorneys made Hail Mary attempts to get the Missouri Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, to intervene. They ultimately ended up declining. Now, I want to say Wesley Bell is going to be coming on this show on Friday, and I'm sure they're going to talk at length about this case, so we'll keep this a shorter part of our discussion today. But it's fair to say that Bell's involvement made this case highly unusual. Nicole, do you think there was any chance that the U.S. Supreme Court would have said, hey, we got to put a stop to this one? Even the prosecutor from this jurisdiction does not want this execution to go forward.
Well, I think when you hear that you have a prosecutor from the jurisdiction who doesn't want the case to go forward, you think, oh my gosh, this is one that absolutely shouldn't go forward. And I need to make clear, I don't support the death penalty. But when you're talking about this particular case, he had an actual innocence claim at the beginning because of the DNA evidence that they found. They found other people's DNA involved in this case, and he was in part convicted on DNA. The problem is when they ended up going back and testing that DNA, they found out it belonged to people in the prosecutor's office. So it wasn't a viable actual innocence claim. And I think, if you're going to support the death penalty, then, an actual innocence claim is, you have to take that seriously. But once this one had that issue resolved, I think it was more likely that nothing was going to happen.
Yeah. That the outcome that we ended up with.
I think that's the deciding issue.
And look at the damage done to the anti-death penalty movement by bringing a case claiming this innocence defense, which turns out to be baloney, and then everybody who is in favor of the death penalty says, see, They're all full of baloney.
Is that you doing this right now, Bevis?
That's not what I said. That was a hypothetical.
these people, these people out there. Javad.
So there was no smoking gun that said he was absolutely innocent. But you had a prosecutor who came in, reviewed the facts, and said, wait a second, there wasn't enough to convict this person. And there's three things that happened in this case that are, I think, simply gross. Okay, the previous governor, Governor Greitens, put together a panel, appointed a panel to look into this case and to make a recommendation as to whether this person deserves some form of clemency. Out of nowhere, Governor Parsons disbanded that panel, did not let them finish their job. What is the downside to letting them finish that job? Second, the prosecutor's office and the defendant's attorneys met with a judge. And here's the important part. The victim's family sat in and spoke with the judge for hours and said, we've got concerns. We want this case changed to life in prison with no chance of parole. This person couldn't be a threat. It would allow them to continue moving forward and trying to prove his innocence instead of killing him. Everybody agreed to it. Everybody agreed. And then the attorney general jumps in at the last second and says, no, I disagree with it. And then goes on TV and says he's doing it for the victims when the victim's family says they don't want to do this. And then the last thing is a piece of evidence comes up in the last week or so where one of the prosecutors admits on the stand that he was striking at least one juror because he was black. And in actuality, he struck 6 out of 7 jurors because they were black. Do I think that this Supreme Court, this pro-life Supreme Court, would have overturned this? No. On a 6-3 with the 6 pro-life justices, they executed a man and they didn't allow this to play out. There would have been no downside to allowing this to play out and letting the victim's family get what they wanted. It was gross.
I mean, while I agree in general with everything that Javad said, I am going to disagree with a point. Those are all arguments that have to do with not supporting the death penalty, in my opinion. And so I can find a million arguments that I believe in that are not supporting the death penalty. The problem is we have a structure in place. We do have the death penalty, and we do need to follow that structure. And I think it was followed in this case. So whereas I agree with you, philosophy, Javad, I think I disagree in terms of, I hate to say this, but upholding our institutions, which is something that is, strongly challenged these days. And I believe in upholding, the institutions that make the system work. And I think in this case, unfortunately, the facts and the law just weren't there.
I'm going to say for anybody who wants to learn more about this case, there were certainly so many twists and turns. Again, Wesley Bell will be on the show this Friday. That's happening at noon. And today we're here with our Legal Roundtable. That's Nicole Gorovsky. We're also joined by Javad Khazaeli and Bevis Schock. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about perjury that seems to have been committed on camera in the HBO hit series Chimp Crazy. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. I'm Sarah Fensky. I'm here today with our Legal Roundtable, chewing into all the meaty issues that are happening in the judicial system here in St. Louis and in the state of Missouri. I have 3 expert panelists helping me do that. That includes Javad Khazaeli. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's also the founding member of the St. Louis firm Khazaeli Wersch. And we're joined by Nicole Gorovsky, a former prosecutor in both state and federal court. Today she's with Jenkins and Kling PC. And we're also joined by Bevis Schock, who practices in Clayton at Schock Law. So, Bevis, I want to talk to you about Chimp Crazy.
Let's go.
Okay, so this HBO show, I hope everybody's been watching this because it's amazing. It's also a ratings hit, and it's a story that we previously covered on this show back in the day. It's nice to see the national pop culture industry pick up on our greatest hits. So this show depicts the sordid goings-on at the Chimp Party compound in Festus. It shows the woman who took over this compound, Tanya Haddix, flat out lying to U.S. District Court Judge Catherine Perry. Haddix was being sued by PETA. They got an order from Perry saying that the chimps in her possession had to be turned over to an animal sanctuary. She turned them all over but one. This was the movie star chimp Tonka. She said Tonka was dead. She sobbed in court telling the story. It's very clear watching Chimp Crazy that she lied and that she knew she was lying. Bevis, what do you make of this? What kind of punishment should she get here?
Lawyers make their money by people lying.
Is that right?
I can't be completely against that.
I thought we were completely against that, no?
Hamlet talks about 1 in 10,000 tells the truth every day.
Wow.
The question is whether she's going to face a perjury charge or not. The U.S. attorney, now we have some federal prosecutors here. My experience is they take cases, A, that they're sure they're going to win, and B, that don't take too much work.
Yeah.
C, though, they take cases that are really important. So the question is, here we have a case about a chimp. I don't think that's that important, very honestly. I think the Alger Hiss case, let's go a little bit of history. Alger Hiss was the darling of the left, Harvard Law School, welcome in all the Georgetown salons. He was at the highest level of the State Department during the Cold War, giving all the American secrets to the Russians as an absolute spy, proved later in the archives of the Russians. They blew the treason charge on some kind of statute of limitations problem, and they prosecuted him for perjury because he said he didn't know his contact, a guy named Whittaker Chambers. And the critical thing for us is because it's fall, it's pumpkin season, and Whittaker Chambers and Alger Hiss hid the papers in the pumpkin patch, and it's called historically the Pumpkin Papers case.
Pumpkin Papers. I love this. Like, this is some high-profile perjury.
I'm not done yet,
Javad. I'm not done. So the point is, that case involved treason, the highest levels of perjury in the federal government, and that was definitely worth the time. If I'm a federal prosecutor, I think I face a case here that is very high profile.
Yes.
But is it really worth the time? Does it matter? That's how I would size it up.
Let me argue with you on this. I mean,
I haven't taken a position. I've just said it's a question.
It's a good question. But doesn't the high-profile nature of this case make it something important? Because the public needs to have trust in the judicial system, that people aren't just going in there lying their pants off.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say. This is a slap in the face, and it's being published all over the place. I think the prosecutors really do need to do something about this. I mean, one of the things that, lawyers kind of always know is that perjury never gets charged. It's usually, small potatoes and not a big deal. This one is a big deal because it's being flouted. And when it's flouted, you got to do something about it, and I hope they do. Now,
I want to also take issue with the idea that this is not important. I think PETA would argue this is important. This involves chimps. But Javad, do you think, like, when there is a case everyone can agree on that's important, that they're taking these perjury cases over at the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I don't think that would be the defining question for me. Any of us who've ever appeared in federal court in front of the Honorable Catherine Perry, this is utterly shocking to me. I mean, the idea that you would do this, Catherine Perry is a serious jurist. We did the case a few years ago where we sued the St. Louis Police Department for the kettle, and that case eventually became a class action in front of Judge Perry. You don't mess with Judge Perry. What I think the difference in this case is prosecutors take cases that are important. Alger Hiss didn't have Netflix. If Alger Hiss had done this on TV and recorded himself doing this, my guess is it wouldn't have been as difficult a case. The fact that she's on video talking to the judge, crying, they're recording her. And then as soon as it's done, she closes her laptop and basically says, I got away with it and flouted this. And the other big difference here is that often the prosecutors have to make decisions which cases are coming in, but it depends on how the case gets to them. This is a senior judge of the Eastern District of Missouri has sent over a referral saying, this case is so important to me. I mean, I've cross-examined hundreds of people in my life. And Bevis is correct. Almost all of them lie. I mean, I'm the attorney on the bar. Yeah.
Once again, Bevis is right.
I'm the attorney on the Bar PM case. They're saying something happened, and they've got a story. And I've got a video that shows that it's all fake. Those cops lied. They're not going to get perjury charges on this. But when you do this on TV, there's no better piece of evidence than saying, Your Honor, I'm going to hit the play button. And they hit play. Now, the other thing to look at is Judge Perry's also done everything within her power. She's hit this woman with almost $225,000 in fines.
This is for civil contempt of court.
Correct. She doesn't have the ability to do anything beyond that. If the person was in court, she could possibly have ordered them, confined for some kind of contempt.
If she found out in real time about this flagrant lie, that might be different, you're saying.
Correct. But we also have the next question. She gave out $175,000 in attorney's fees to be paid within 7 days and $49,000 in expenses to be paid within 7 days. At certain point, I don't know, this happened a while ago. Those fines were assessed in March of 2023. If Tanya hadn't paid them, there may have been other remedies. But the remedy that the judge decided was to send it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I would hope that the U.S. Attorney's Office would do this. A, judge is serious.
Mm-hmm.
She's important. This is important to her. And B, because this is easy. You just hit play.
Bevis, what do you think now that you've, sort of this analysis here? I know it's not pumpkin papers level, but do you think the U.S. attorney is going to pull the trigger?
I think Javad's point about the fact that it's from Judge Perry is going to be the winner and the deciding factor, and the U.S. attorney will do it. Otherwise, the next time that U.S. attorney is in front of Judge Perry, she looks at him and says, or her, and says, "What happened to my perjury case?"
Yeah, that's a hard question right there for them.
That's a bad question.
Yeah, no, fair. I do want to mention Tanya Haddock spoke to a producer on this show, Emily Woodbury, earlier this month, and she did say that she regrets lying about this chimp's death.
At the time, I had no idea that PETA would not claim victory with the 6 being taken out of there. And whenever I said Tonka was dead to them, I underestimated their behaviors, their erratic, crazy behaviors. And I just had no clue that they would have challenged that any further. So then it put me in a different position, and I felt like I had no choice. But do I regret it? Absolutely.
That is the one and only Tanya Haddock speaking to our producer.
Even worse.
As an attorney, all of my anxiety is this is just the second thing you can hit play on. She's just admitting it over and over again. And she's not even saying, "I'm sorry." She's saying, "I'm sorry I got caught."
Right.
This is bad.
So, Nicole, you don't think that the prosecutor's going to listen to that remorse there and be like, "Oh, she's clearly learned her lesson. Let's let her go."
No, I don't think so. And that makes it, that doubles down. It's so much worse.
So much worse. Well, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this one on a future Legal Roundtable, what ends up happening on this case. We should all be just checking the docket, see who gets indicted lately in St. Louis federal court.
Can we bring Tonka the chimp in and see Tonka's view on this?
I'd be all in favor of that.
Sure.
I don't know if if the producers on the show would allow me to do that, but my vote is 100% yes.
If they're going to give me a microphone, they'll give Tonka a microphone.
One should hope.
Some people think that chimps are actually people and understand who's lying and who's not. I'm not in that group.
Yeah, well, that's one where, reasonable people can disagree.
Tonka loves her, I'm quite sure, because she cares for Tonka and she feeds him and cares for him. There was an allegation she was breastfeeding one of these chimps. That's pretty gross.
It's some pretty gross, pretty wild stuff. And that is, in fact, why I'm going to change the subject. There was resolution in 2 high-profile trademark infringement disputes this past month. The Homer G. Phillips Hospital had been sued by a Nurses Alumni Association trying to block this new mini hospital from using the name associated with the storied Black hospital here in St. Louis. Now, they lost this Nurses Alumni Association. The hospital can keep this name. Meanwhile, the maker of Mission-branded tortillas sued local Mission Taco Joint. They changed the name of the St. Louis restaurant group basically because they lost the case, they have to change their name to Session Taco. And I shouldn't say they lost. The settlement in the case is that they will change their name. So why do you think one of these cases succeeded, Nicole, and the other one had some trouble?
Well, I think the logic is the first one, the Homer G. Phillips Memorial Hospital, is Homer G. Phillips was a person. No one can trademark his name, and probably except him. I don't know enough about trademark to know that. But this was the Homer G. Phillips Nurses Association, and I don't think they had a monopoly on the Homer G. Phillips name. And I think that's the difference here. Mission Taco was a different issue where they had gone out in the world as, the Mission tortilla chips, Mission products, and had gotten a trademark that was very unique to their name. Now, I'm not sure the Mission Taco one was as valid as, it seems either. I kind of think both of them are, not so great, but I do see the difference there.
Do you think Mission Taco Joint maybe just made this settlement because they can't afford to fight this multinational corporation that, has a lot at stake here?
I think that could be a large part.
I think that Mission Taco loved it because every day they were in the news, their name was one more taco to the good. And then when they changed their name, that got all kinds of publicity. They couldn't have played it better.
I do think Mission Taco Joint also has a name in town that a lot of people know. Now they're going to have to change that name. I mean, if that was part of the strategy, it worked great until now. Maybe it doesn't work at all. They just got all the publicity for the old name.
I think they got publicity for the new name at the settlement, and I think it'll work out for them just fine. They're not going to lose a single tortilla chips worth of money.
I hope so, because I do love their food. Javad.
So first I have to announce a conflict of interest because Mission Tacos black beans are my 14-year-old's favorite food in the world. One of the tenets of trademark law is there confusion for the consumer? Mission Taco's been around for a long time. What really made this case different is that Mission Taco now has decided to go into grocery stores. And one of the underlying facts here that I found interesting is that Mission food brands found out about Mission Taco at the National Tortilla Convention. There's apparently a National Tortilla Convention of some sort. And at the point that they found out that Mission Taco was starting to sell tortilla chips in stores, they said, wait a second. Maybe we're not going to get confused with a taco joint in St. Louis, but if they're putting our main product in a store with our name, they can't do that. Because a big factor in trademark law is if you don't enforce your trademark, you can lose your trademark. So you kind of have to do that. So I actually think that this was a pretty strong case. And even the owner of Mission Taco, now Session Taco, says, yeah, it was a pretty ironclad case. My bigger issue, and I think Bevis can talk about this more, is that with the hospital, the history is a little bit different.
The hospital that now gets to keep this name of Homer G. Phillips.
Well, let's remember, there was an old hospital in St. Louis that was a predominantly black hospital. That hospital closed many years ago and has been a very important portion of St. Louis history. These alumni from the hospital named their group. I don't think they have a strong claim. But what really is lost in this is that a new hospital has opened. It's not really a hospital. It's got 15 beds.
Sure.
And it isn't a predominantly black-owned hospital. It's owned by Paul McKee.
The noted developer.
You call him developer, I call him the person who's been taking advantage of North St. Louis. I think Bevis can tell you a little bit about his history. So what makes me feel kind of bad about this is that I think McKee's argument is right, and I have to agree with him, but he doesn't really get the benefit of the doubt in a lot of places. And I can understand why somebody would sue him.
Yeah. Bevis, you fought this guy for a long
Years
time.
ago, McKee was going for a tax increment financing on basically all of North St. Louis. I brought the challenge with a guy named Eric Vickers. We won in the trial court, won in the Court of Appeals, lost in the Supreme Court. We had the chairman of the Washington University Econ Department as our expert who said, this is great for Mr. McKee. If he succeeds, he gets rich. If the project fails, he gets rich. We still lost in the Supreme Court. Anything that Paul McKee does, we will note, falls way short of what he promised. He said he was going to make North St. Louis be a successful economic place. He has done nothing one gas station, and now a hospital with 15 beds. He is a disgrace to this community, and our laws that allow him to do it are a disgrace to our community.
Yeah, the bigger picture story here is sad. It's so sad. And yet, Bevis, you think in this case he was right.
Oh, Javad's correct. Yeah, because it's you just, and so is Nicole. You're not going to win that case. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad they kind of brought it. Anything to challenge Paul McKee, I'm in favor of, but they were going to lose.
Underlying all of this, it's not just a gas station. Remember when he opened the supermarket across the street, and this is going to change the food desert, and he took all the tax money and all of the grant money and all this, and then the supermarket closed. This is probably a tax grift. This hospital, let's see if it even exists in 3 years, but I think Bevis is right. Just the fact that there's a hospital there, even if it fails, Paul McKee's going to make money on the backs of taxpayers, and especially taxpayers in impoverished communities where he has buildings that he owns, he's not taking care of, they're collapsing, and he's still getting paid on it. So yes, he's right on this argument, but more power to the Nurses Association for at least trying to hold him to some standard.
We are talking today to our Legal Roundtable. That's Javad Khazaeli. We're also joined by Bevis Schock and Nicole Gorovsky. We do need to take a quick break, but before we go into it, I do want to correct the record on the breastfeeding chimps discussion that I shut down a little too hastily. For the record, it was not Tanya Haddix who breastfed chimps. It was a trainer named Pam Roger, who's a circus trainer. And Pam shared that in the docuseries Chimp Crazy. So that's the first time I've ever had to make a correction along those lines. Coming up next, we're going to talk about a lawsuit against Nelly. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Sarah Fensky. I'm in today with our Legal Roundtable, an expert group of attorneys helping us make sense of the law, helping us make sense of Chimp Crazy, helping us make sense of the pumpkin papers. We are all over the place today, but we are all learning so much. Those attorneys include Bevis Schock, who practices law in Clayton at Schock Law. Also Javad Khazaeli, a former federal prosecutor. He's now with the St. Louis firm Khazaeli Wersch. And last but never least, Nicole Gorovsky, who's a former prosecutor in both state and federal court. Today, she's at Jenkins and Kling PC. So the St. Louis-based rapper Nelly is being sued by his former bandmates. They're credited on some songs on the album Country Grammar, but they were alleged they were denied writing credits and royalties for 8 others, including, most notably, this track. Now, that, of course, is the title track of Country Grammar. None of the St. Lunatics are credited. They say they deserve that credit. But let's be real here. This album came out so long ago that I was still a young person at that point. That was 24 years ago. Nicole, is there any chance that this lawsuit can get around the statute of limitations?
So this falls under the heading of why do lawyers exist? Because the statute of limitations is actually more complicated than people think it is. So if there's something that, for example, has a 5-year statute of limitations, a lot of people who aren't lawyers might think, okay, 5 years goes by and it's over. Well, our statute of limitations, first of all, is a little more complicated than that, in that it has a discovery portion to it. First of all, it's whatever the time limit is from when a person discovers their injury. Now, that's what our statute says. What our judges say is, yeah, we're not really going to go with that very much. Basically, for example, in child sex abuse cases, repressed memory would count as a delayed discovery of your injuries. In this case, that this wouldn't be that. They probably don't have too much delayed discovery, but there are also exceptions to the statute of limitations. So for every statute, there are exceptions. So, for example, if there's fraud, which could be a valid argument in this case, that there was fraud that, Nelly and the business kept saying, we're going to pay you. Now, I don't know if that's going to be a meritorious argument. It's an argument. The problem is, how long do you let that go on before, the fraud argument doesn't work too much? But again, there are exceptions to the statute of limitations that they have valid arguments here. It's just a question of whether or not they'll actually win the day.
Do you think this is just a matter of trying to bring just a strong enough claim that they can get a decent settlement? Because it's going to be hard to win on the merits, but he's not going to want this to drag out forever.
I think that's quite possible, and here we are talking about it, so it's working.
It's working. Bevis, thoughts on this one?
I'm with Nicole. It's a long time. And also, where was the written contract? People are responsible for their business affairs. You're going to go and sing on some album, you ought to have an agent or somebody call one of the attorneys in this room and say, hey, I've got a need for a contract. Please help me with that.
I don't know if I'd call any of the attorneys in this room for my contract work. Obviously, lots of other matters. Wow. I would indeed. But in this one, these guys are like high school friends, right? They're just trying to make it big. At that point, it's not necessarily a case that somebody would have a top agent involved. Do you think that helps them legally, that they could have this argument of naivete?
No. To heck with that argument. Pay attention to your legal rights.
Javad.
So I think you flagged an issue about, is this case good enough? In a case, there are two spots before you get to a jury where a defendant can kick a case out. One is very early on in the case called a motion to dismiss. And at that point, the question is there enough evidence based on how you pled your lawsuit? And in this lawsuit, they did plead this basically as a fraud case, that Nelly repeatedly told them you were getting this money, was paying them some money, and then they found out later that they claim he was lying and that he was hiding money. That is likely good enough to get you past a motion to dismiss, when then you can start grabbing documents, seeing if what we alleged is good enough. Way down the road, after you're done with all the evidence, is summary judgment. And that is when the judge looks at not just what you said, but what evidence you came up with. That's a long road. Yeah. That's a lot of people talking about the St. Lunatics and Nelly. There is most cases in that window, that's where they settle. And I hope this settles because, as you were saying, this was the soundtrack of growing up. And if I were to have thought years ago that I would be on NPR talking about Nelly and breastfeeding chimps, I would never have thought that this was possible. So we're checking off lots of boxes for me.
I mean, if you had told me this morning I'd be on public radio talking about breastfeeding chimps, I too would have been shocked. But, this
and
is what
Bevis
happens.
Schock agreeing with you.
Yes, that I'm actually more shocked by. Something else that was noted to me was that they filed a copyright infringement lawsuit, not a copyright ownership lawsuit. This may be another way of trying to get around that tight 3-year statute of limitations. It's going to be lawyers fighting lawyers. We're going to see how this all pans out. I want to talk about a horrifying case out of Florissant. A police officer is accused of using a traffic stop as a pretext to access the smartphones of young female motorists, and then apparently, taking their phones back to his car, looking through these phones, finding their nude photos, and then he took photos of these nudes so that he could have them for his personal stash. Now, the latest development, this was in a story at St. Louis Magazine, is that he allegedly preyed on a young girl who just turned 18. She had nudes on her phone that her lawyer says were clearly taken before she was 18. This officer, Nicole, is obviously in some big trouble. Does her age make this even deeper? Bigger trouble.
Absolutely, it does. So, you get in trouble for possession of child pornography. And this very well could be child pornography. And a lot of times ignorance does not matter. It's what you have and what the rule is. I do want to use this opportunity to send a direct message to Mr. Voitis, who is representing the young woman. And I think in the initial press said for a long time he didn't know the name of this officer and that he, wasn't sure he could find it out. There is a special provision of the Sunshine Law that allows victims to get information about their cases. It would have been a simple Sunshine Law request. So here's my message to Mr. Voitis. Please do that work.
Yeah, that this is an officer who needs to be held accountable. Bevis? So
I anticipate that I will be representing another victim. I need to explain an insurance issue. So we're going to sue the officer, and the officer will hopefully have insurance. The problem is the officer, I'm sure, has no money. I mean, he might have $20,
Sure.
but he's not going to get money. And oftentimes the insurance company will void the policy when there is a criminal charge asserting we don't insure criminal acts of that nature. I've been stuck with that before. So now the only way to get paid is to sue Florissant. And that is a special kind of action in the civil rights laws that I know a lot about and understand and I've used before successfully. To do that, there's going to have to be proven somehow that it was more than one guy acting alone, that there were complaints that were ignored, that the supervisor had an inclination to believe this, something like that. This is a super hard case to get compensation for the victims.
And this seems like such a terrible case for the victims. I mean, these women are doing nothing other than driving and someone's rifling through their phone. It's unfortunate that the way that our law works, that this is a particularly hard way to get restitution.
Welcome to the civil rights laws.
I mean, what Bevis says is exactly right. We have a lot of, he's cheering for me. We have a lot of specific laws and rules put in place by conservatives that protect police officers. We have qualified immunity. We have absolute immunity. We have sovereign immunity. We have all of these things in place that make this more difficult. If this were an employee of St. Louis Public Radio.
Don't even say it.
But if this were an employee of any non-police group,
sure,
you could say that if this person was doing their job, bright line, they were doing it as a part of their job, that the employer is responsible because the person is an employee, respondent superior. We have specific carve-outs for that. We have specific things in our laws that give police officers and governments special protections. And it's weird because it's protecting them from the public. Like, here's an example of a law. If in Missouri, if a police officer is negligent and causes an accident and kills people, we have a cap on the amount of money. So if a police officer is on their phone, loses control and drives through a crowd of people and kills 20 people, the maximum amount of money that that police department would have to pay out is about $440,000 split up amongst 20 people.
Wow.
So you get $22,000 for the death of your child. That's not a law that protects a company. So Bevis is right. There are things here that make it very difficult. One way around this, without showing a pattern in practice, is you can go and say, hey, the police department may have negligent hiring. My guess is Florissant may have some problems with how they hired this person. Did they fully look into their background? Has this been a problem? That might be a way around it, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And that's why when people say, why aren't we holding police accountable? It's A, often the department isn't doing it, and B, the law protects them.
Nicole, we have about a minute left here. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's not an easy case. Immunity is absolutely an issue. I will say, though, it's very rare that you're catching a predator on the first time.
Sure.
So I think, if they get, to do discovery in this case, they're going to find something. That this police department probably knew he had something in his background.
Well, and we certainly know there are multiple victims because now there are multiple lawyers involved. I think even the original lawyer involved has multiple victims in this case. You'd think maybe, as you say, if you guys can show that he was sharing these with a coworker, it sounds like you've got a totally different case.
Perhaps. We'll see.
Yeah.
That's going to take some time to play out.
Okay. Well, this will be one to watch. I understand he is no longer with the Florissant Police Department, but we still don't know very much about this guy.
But that's actually an important
We
point.
have just a few seconds here.
In Bar PM, that officer's not with the department anymore. But were they fired or did they resign? Because when you resign under investigation in Missouri, this officer could still get a job at another police department.
Wow. And that's, if this guy did this and ends up getting a job in another police department, that should be a cause of great unrest. I want to thank our panel for joining us today. Javad Khazaeli of the firm Khazaeli Wirsch, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks again.
And Bevis Schock of Schock Law, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for letting me talk from the right.
And Nicole Gorovsky of Jenkins & Kling, thank you.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Sarah Fensky. Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.